Says it's starting.
All right, and Jen, would you mind pulling up the deck? And again, the goal here for the working group, we have a meeting today, we have a meeting on Tuesday, and then we have the commission meeting on June 25th. And we kind of need to land, and Peter, I'll hand it over to you in just a second to kind of do the intro part of this. But where we need to land by June 25th is basically being able to talk about the current state and ideal future state, some best practices and some barriers. And so the goal for today is to really hone in on the sort of current state and some best practice examples that we pulled out from the research we did. The goal on Tuesday is really talk about visioning for the future state, don't have to solve for it yet, and really talk through the barrier part on Tuesday. And then hopefully from these conversations, which I do hope they are a conversation, we can have feedback as SIP team to sort of make the materials we need, and then would happily socialize that with the liaisons and entire working group before June 25th. So this is all happening fairly quickly. And then as soon as June 25th is over, we'll get into the sort of solutionary part. But that's what the goal for today is. So with that, Peter, do you want to take the kind of first few slides?
Sure. I mean, much of it's sort of boilerplate, and I'm grateful to have the group of colleagues that we have together here. Maybe just keep going. I actually did really liked the norms that we discussed as a group, and I liked the way that Miguel sort of framed it for the team. And I'm glad we are all starting on time. We are all committed to deep engagement. And in spite of the virtual connection, we're going to try and limit distractions and outside commitments. We're working together. We're going to push each other to get uncomfortable. And, you know, we're really trying to view this not from our own sort of parochial points of view within our own organizations and disciplines, but really on behalf of the whole state. You know, I think that's a really great framework. Oh, I like first names also, so I'm glad we're with that. I'm glad that Miguel said that too. I think that's really important. So we'll recognize existing strengths. We'll take space and we'll make more space. We'll facilitate tracking to actionable deliverables. We'll tell the story about options and disagree and commit. Okay, so as we discussed in our first meeting, there are four main path streams, four main work streams that have been identified for the commission, and we are here working on the design and governance first here. So we've got career connected education, work-based learning, and statewide systems as well. So if we think about pathways, design, and governance, the verbiage that's associated with that, it goes something like define, prioritize industries and associated credentials, technical skills and soft skills needed, along with the governance structures for ongoing reevaluation, definitions and credentials, and governance recommendations. That seems to be what we're focusing on, if I'm understanding our charge correctly. So here we are, a few days before that first dotted line box. All committees are asked to present in 2 weeks at the June 25th meeting. I think it's moved to the afternoon now. Did I see that correctly? And then from there, we'll have a chance to focus and sort of reconnoiter our presentation to make it a final presentation regarding pathways, design, and governance on July 9th. Chris, may I hand it to you?
Yep, happy to take it here. So like I was saying, what we're really trying to land for June 29th is to be able to talk authoritatively about what is really going on all across Connecticut, both what's going well and what needs to be improved. And sort of the vision statement, the audacious, like, hey, if we could wave a magic wand, what would that look like? And just clearly identify barriers. That's the goal for June 25th. Although the implied part for our working group is July 9th will come very quickly. So if we want to get a little ahead of ourselves and start talking about solutions, happy to do that. But what we absolutely have to deliver June 25th, what all working streams will be delivering, are those sort of three parts. And this meeting is really to talk about current state, and our meeting on Tuesday is talking about future state and barriers. So here, and when we're presenting this information on June 25th, we're going to present it both in slide format, which will be high-level highlights, and we'll also probably produce a more detailed associated document. And what I shared with liaisons, what we're about to walk through here, is a more detailed version. What the slides will have a little bit less, and the commission will probably just have like the absolute major highlights. But with that, I think it's fair to start with Connecticut has done a lot of decent work, and there's some metrics that different parts of our state should genuinely take pride in. I think we have done a lot. State Department of Education has done a lot around dual enrollment in recent years. OWS and Career Connect has been a tremendously impactful program, and I think we learned a lot of lessons from it. DOL does have registered apprenticeships, and they have pretty good rates. But I think what these sort of individual stories kind of gloss over is, what does it really mean for a student in the system, and what does it really look like for an employer in our state? And at the end of the day, I think for a student to have to navigate all these different program options, it's really confusing. And some students get lucky and get good advisors, or they're in the right school district that has the right opportunities. But those students are generally the lucky ones, and we haven't systematized the best practices across the state. And likewise for an employer, because we have a lot of different state agencies doing a lot of different works, they have a lot of different coordination to do all throughout the state if they really want to play. And some of our larger employers, while it may be painful, they may have to do it. They certainly can do it, but also like half the employees in the state are employed by small and medium-sized businesses that might be really difficult to try and figure out if you really need to partner with DOL or Career Connect or STE or school district or whatnot. So, and that kind of gets us to some interesting things when you zoom out a little bit. Our state has tens of thousands of unfilled jobs and also tens of thousands of disconnected youth. And not saying that this is fundamentally the crisis of governance, but I think this is just trying to make, excuse me, a key point that while there's a ton of great work happening in different pockets all across the state, good individual programs don't necessarily have the same level of output that we need to have if we have a really unified, coordinated system. And if we get to the next slide, when I was kind of researching this and sharing with the liaisons, I think we're kind of really honing in on this main idea for our work stream, and the main problem sort of statement is that our state is a mosaic of a lot of different programs. And states who do career pathways well, and this is like, if I had to sum it up in 30 seconds, this is what I would say. States who've done it well have figured out a way to unify the authority lines, the definitions, the funding streams, to actually make sure that we are delivering a systemic solution. And to Miguel's point in our kickoff meeting, that we can stop relying on superheroes that are doing really good jobs in their individual pockets and start systematizing the outcome. And if we can go to the next slide, just to give you an example of things that we found, if you look at the different kind of state agencies, we have different definitions of what even a career pathway means. And some of them make sense for that group, but then there's also populations that get lost. SDE really focuses on some dual credit and work-based learning and some industry credentials, and they have adult learning. And I just want to call out, adults aren't technically excluded, but it's sort of adult learning through GED. And is that the best place for it? CSU, our largest by student count higher ed body, really focuses, excuse me, because they have CT State and that's half of CSU, tend to focus a lot on certifications and whatnot, but they're also missing the sort of adults without college connections. OWS, and Kelly, I know you're on the call, does a lot of work, but it's the point we're trying to make here is there's a lot of different definitions and they're not totally perfectly synced yet. If we can go to the next slide.
Chris, I would agree with that, but there is some missing information on the OWS side of things that we're doing that is not just focused on WIOA. So I'll fill you in and give you more information on that.
Perfect. Sounds great. We'll go to the next slide. The definitions is like a starting point, and I think the sort of decision authority when I look at state programs of who gets to really compel action, right? So our state Department of Education can sort of compel action over districts, although we also have a lot of independence in school districts. CSU can compel within CSU, but not across higher ed. OWS, and Kali, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, is mostly convening authority, so can't really compel much, even though it's supposed to be the sort of part that can do the system-wide strategy work. DOL has a lot of authority over WIO, I think, but not a ton of compelling authority over the education side. And that gets kind of keep going down to the RSPs and all the independent towns and school districts that we have. This is just getting to the whole main point that it is a very complicated mosaic when you really start to peel back the actual authority to say, hey, agency or department or whatever, you must do something, and all the underlying school districts or whatnot having to comply with that. It's difficult if you want to say the state of Connecticut should do something as a whole. You have to, right now, navigate a bunch of different decision authorities. So if we can go to the next slide. That's made even more complicated with all different funding streams. So as much as I think there is 5 different definitions, there's a couple more decision authorities. I think there's up to 9 or so different funding streams that we were pulling apart. And some of these are adding to the sort of disjointedness of the mosaic and to the definitions. So in Perkins, for example, for something to qualify for Perkins funding, and Kara, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's really like a 2-core sequence. And so a lot of school districts will start to use that as a standard. And when we're talking about career pathways are actually meaningful for both students and businesses, it may not be 2 courses, but that's the easy answer because you're relying on Perkins funding to do it, right? We have a bunch of different funding streams. And like I said, the fundamental, I think, insight here from the current state, and we're definitely going to socialize this to make sure we get all the underlying details right. But the underlying narrative here is just this mosaic makes it really hard to have a unified approach as a state. And not to highlight where we're going with the future state meeting next week, but every state who has figured out how to do this, and they've all done it differently, have found a way to unify funding, decision authority definitions to have it be a unified system. So next slide. And this is just highlighting, in Connecticut today, we have agencies and we have people all over our state government who are genuinely doing good work, but some of the scope is overlapping. Some of it is uncoordinated through authority and funding streams. We have different definitions. We don't have one statewide definition. We have different industry frameworks. We have just a whole bunch of different approaches to it that aren't all moving in the same direction. And again, foreshadowing the sort of future state here, states who have done this well have found some way to unify it all. So next slide. And just to give you an idea of what we're meaning by that, and these are not necessarily the absolute best example states to pull from, Delaware, nearby, probably one of the leading states for career pathways, has taken a sort of cross-agency design body approach. Louisiana has brought in employers to have a validation body to make sure that what they're actually building makes sense for their businesses. Massachusetts, just to the north of us, have built a different way of doing it. Tennessee has built a state level credential policy that everyone sort of has to adhere to. So different states doing it differently, not saying these are the absolute best models to follow, but again, just making the point that we really need to find a way, I think, to align authority with accountability and really have it funding match that in a way that makes sense for Connecticut. Next slide. And when we were kind of looking across a whole bunch of different states who are doing this well, here are sort of the 8 things that really bubble to the surface, regardless of any individual state model, that makes it work. Authority, matching, responsibility. Designing for the learner, not the institution. And this is definitely all my education friends, you know, our higher ed institutions especially are large bureaucracies, and sometimes it's hard to really put the student and learner back in the front and center. Having employer validation as a requirement, not a courtesy. Having a system that can be self-correcting, and I think in the land of AI being disrupting of the job market, that's probably more important today than when a lot of other states have done this equivalent of their work. Equity as a design requirement, not an add-on. I think everyone that lives in Connecticut understands we're one of the richest states in the country, but we're also one of the most unequal states in the country. And that one model working in one community is not necessarily what's automatically going to work in another community. Data, at the end of the day, in order for the system to be self-correcting, data systems have to be built. And there's been a lot of work being done on this, but I also think there's a lot of work to go to be able to make data-informed decisions as an entire system. The simplicity is a design goal, is really talking about when you start coordinating across the agencies, it can get complicated fast in the day-to-day work. Those who live it every day, I'm sure, can attest to that. But sort of the end state goal you're trying to reach, as simple as you can keep that over and over and over again, those goals are the ones that usually stand the test of time. And then build on what works. Again, we're not here to say Connecticut isn't doing great work, that there isn't great work being done in these pockets. I think what we're trying to do is reset what we think great is, and how do we systematize that in a way that we don't have to be building or working against the system to get those results. So these are the last couple slides, and Kara, I think we're about to turn over to you, but maybe what we do, I just ran through that and talked at everyone. And the goal of this meeting was actually to have a discussion. So maybe we kind of tee it up and just pause it there for a quick minute and see what people's reactions are, if that sounds about right, if we're missing anything.
I could jump in, and Chris and Jen, just amazing job with background data gathering, and then insights from the smaller work group in between were very illuminating. I would say just in here, you know, kind of through the discussion today, and I was thinking about the funding streams, and just another component maybe to add is, so those are the funding streams that currently exist, but I could think of in my own role and context, which I'm, you know, trying to keep it to the broader state level, but this would apply at a state level. What are the funding streams that could exist that, you know, so that are positioned and flowing in a different direction that can be refocused in this area? And I could think of a couple as a K-12 superintendent that I have access to that can be repurposed for this work. And if we could think globally about that and the funding streams that do exist, how do you create, you know, more incentivized pathways in the funding streams that are already available to us that may not be named for this work?
Chris,
Yeah,
I think the 3 buckets that you pulled together and the ability to define all of the different agencies and kind of lay it out that way is extremely helpful, and really spot on. And there are so many competing buckets of funding and authorities and responsibilities that are not coordinated. Our office was designed to be a coordinator of all things workforce, but without, as you mentioned, the authority to actually move the work forward. And I think that is part of the governance structure and the funding structure that we really need to look at is how do we build a structure that requires a level of cooperation and decision making on where funding goes, where the money goes, and who owns the money and can allocate the money is really what gets paid attention to in the state.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I was 100% agree with that, Kelly Marie. Also just you know, I think understand. I also just want to say that there is a lot of great work. It's just sort of how do we sort of collate that and bring it all together. And when I think about sort of my work in Hartford, you know, even just town by town and the challenges that sort of we're seeing, you know, in the work and in the space, and how there is this really clear through line, but sort of folks are not able to really see that through line, and from K through 12 into sort of post-secondary success. And so many players in the space. So I just wonder, and I'm excited to see what this group can do to help do that. And I think you're right on, like the money sort of dictates and sort of says where things should be. How do we get to a place where there's more uniformity in that? I'll just also say that, like, at the beginning of the presentation, there was a part where we could introduce ourselves. I feel like I'm speaking to folks that I don't know other than Chris and Kelly Marie Viller, so it feels a little strange to me.
That's a good point. Maybe we do a quick roll call and introductions before we close the session. So Joel, you raised it, so could you kick us off?
Sure. So Joel Hicks Rivera, I work for the Greater Hartford Gibbs Foundation. Jay Williams was our the chosen commissioner. I think he's going to be coming to the larger meetings, but I am most closest to the ground. I have about 28 years of experience working boots on the ground in the last 5 years at the Greater Hartford Gibbs. I'm also an adjunct professor at Connecticut State, so I have the teaching experience. I have 28 years of experience in workforce development, and now I'm on the funding side. So excited to be here. And I'm actually in Hartford. Thank you.
Thank you. Kara?
Sure. Kara Casimiro, superintendent in the Danbury Public Schools. Been there for 29 years. Excited to be here. I think my role in the commission, I think how I got here was we have one of the first wall-to-wall academy models where every student is in a pathway by design, non-negotiable, and gets a similar experience in different areas. So I'm hopefully able to contribute a little bit on that end, but feel very appreciative to be part of the larger group.
Kelly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Valories, the Chief Workforce Officer. I oversee the Office of Workforce Strategy. Governor Lamont instituted the first Chief Workforce Officer across the country and pulled out workforce out of the Department of Labor into an independent state agency that could be strategic and not encumbered by federal WIOA and rules and regulations. And my past that has brought me here is I have a PhD in adult learning and did a tremendous amount of work in teacher professional development, learning online. And then I took over the family manufacturing company and ran that for 14 years, building out workforce pathways in Eastern Connecticut, which we're now super excited have just been are going to be recognized as the national standard for maritime industrial-based training programs. And now I'm here doing this work full time.
Thanks, Kelly. Peter?
Okay, Peter Yu, I'm a surgeon. I've been in Connecticut for over 4 years now. Previously worked at Yale for a good chunk of my career. I now work at HHC. I've been here for about 3.5 years now. I'm in practice in Hartford, and a big chunk of my time is spent as the Chief Academic Officer for the health system. In that role, I oversee the teaching, learning, and research programs for our system. And in that work, I spent quite a bit of time with interfacing with our academic partners from, K through 12 and community colleges, straight through to medical schools and postdoctoral programs and things like that. And every level of education and training is part of our sort of orbit of about 120 different academic organizations that feed our teaching, learning, and workforce pipeline system here at Hartford Healthcare. I'm glad to be able to bring this point of view to this work again, because Hartford Healthcare is now pretty clearly the biggest employer in the state. And we've got a real opportunity to assert a system in which the many healthcare career pathways that exist can be focused into several really strong health systems that are very widely recognized across the country as successful.
Thank you, Peter. Chris?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Chris Rivers. I'm with Social Impact Partners. I am leading the support team for the entire commission, and I'm also leading the work for this particular work stream. My background, I was born and raised in Naugatuck. No one in my family had gone to college before me, and I went and got my EMT certification from Naugatuck Valley Community College when I was still a high school student because I thought I wanted to be on track to become a doctor. And having no doctors in my family, I thought you would work your way up, EMT to nurse to doctor. And ultimately enlisted in the Army and went and fought in Iraq and took my SATs in Kuwait and applied for and got into West Point. And that one experience of getting the EMT certificate while still a high school student gave me enough confidence to even try taking my SATs in the middle of a combat zone. And so I really owe the entire trajectory of my life since then to just getting exposed to different careers early on and being able to make some kind of stupid decisions about how I try to navigate it. And so my passion for doing this work is both one, I just don't think people to climb the economic ladder should have to go fight in wars in order to do that, in order to get to college in a way that is debt free and whatnot. I'm really proud of my service, really glad I did it. But between West Point and then eventually going to get my master's at Georgetown in public policy, international relations, working in the State Department, and then getting into government consulting, doing large scale organizational transformations, I just see the power when government works well for people, it can do a whole lot of good. So that's what I'm doing here. And Jen?
Thanks, Chris. Christina joined us. Christina, we went through a lot of the slides already, and then we're stepping back to introductions. So would you mind introducing yourself, and then I'll finish us up.
Of course, very briefly, Christina Testabuzzi. I am the Grants Performance Manager in the Office of Workforce Strategies, and also work on some special projects. I can't talk this morning. Special projects with Kelly, including the Governor's Workforce Cabinet. Had done some work with Education and Career Pathways with the Governor's Workforce Council, and currently leading our work with Credentials of Value for the state and helping to coordinate a state team that is looking at developing the process plan for implementation of that. My role here is really as a liaison to support the committee and represent OWS and bring our perspective into the conversation. Prior to that, I have about 25, 30 years of higher ed experience prior to joining Workforce Strategies, and that was primarily in faculty, academic affairs, and workforce development. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Christina. And hi, everyone. My name is Jen Beal. My role, I'm also with Social Impact Partners, and my role is to support Chris on this committee and then another SIP colleague on the Work-Based Learning Committee. I'm pretty new to SIP. Prior to that, I was with corporate organizations for over 25 years, primarily in human resources and focusing on global talent development, performance, culture, et cetera. I am a proud graduate of the Bloomfield Public School System and currently live in Reading. And after my college, also a proud graduate of the UConn MBA program. After college, I did spend a couple of years teaching English as a second language in Latin America and developing a program to take people who lived in rural areas to work in the ecotourism industry. So a little bit about, workforce development there. And the other kind of fun fact is that as a high school student, I was a page at the state capitol working for the education committee. So I'm really delighted that this kind of brings me back full circle, and the ability to take my global experience and apply it to this beloved state is really important to me. Before we move on to sort of close, I think we have to do a formal roll call. So I think we'll run that through for our committee members. So Kara.
Kara Casimiro here, present.
Thank you. Peter.
I'm here, and with an apology, I think that was the second slide, and I didn't do that.
That's all right. We flow. Kelly.
Present. And no worries, it takes a little bit of time to get used to this public meeting formalities.
Yeah.
I'm doing my
Here.
best not to swear on the record.
That'll make it more fun, Peter. Joel.
Here, thank you. It is
Yeah.
a little interesting, these formalities, but that's what we have.
And Bob Duff is on the committee but not present, and AJ Harris from EB is on the committee but not present. Okay, I think we can move now, Kara, to the final slides. If
I
that's all
have
right.
just two comments, very quick ones, just,
Of
and it's
course.
most of it related to this. First, I just want to say that I think the conversation for me just got a lot more meaningful and richer knowing your backgrounds and some of the things that I heard, and Chris, like you're one of the reasons why I stay in the superintendency. So I just loved hearing the stories. The second thing is, as you were speaking, Office at Workforce Strategy, used to be in the Department of Labor, and I'm thinking about the different organizations. I was struggling to understand the governance structure of the state of Connecticut. And I realized I may not know all the things that I need to know about hierarchically how these different offices are governed, even within just currently exists. Because I think understanding that could also help us kind of paint the picture for what might need to change organizationally throughout the system, and not just related to career pathways, but I feel like I need to know that. So my guess is that others may need to know that as well. The other thing I found myself doing when the initial document first came out for us to review was, as a superintendent, I had to look up some of the acronyms. And so just to make sure I had, what all these things meant, and I didn't assume that. So maybe a definition of all the acronyms up front would be a helpful guide for those who are reading to follow.
It's the alphabet soup. Yes, and it's like talking a foreign language. So we always have to remember that not everyone is versed in our government language. So happy to help and support that in any way. But I can give you like a really high level overview of how the state is run. So the governor has a chief of staff and a small team at the governor's office. They kind of set the priority vision, the big vision of the things that the governor would like to accomplish. And then there are state agencies, and I forget how many there are, 24 or something like that, independent state agencies. And I say independent because we really are funded independently. There's certain federal and state statutes and regulations that regulate the mission and the responsibilities of every agency. And their work is kind of put within that box of their responsibilities on state and federal side. And their funding sources are dedicated to those specific charges. Then it is our responsibility to ensure that the things we're responsible for happen. So through the staff of those agencies is where the work happens. And each agency, because their charges are different, have different kinds of structures, but they're all led by an agency head with the title of a commissioner or a chief. And actually, I'm the only chief of anything that is equal to a commissioner with his agency head with a different title. And that is why you see agencies doing their own thing, because they are doing their work. And whatever happens between agencies is usually can be formalized through a memorandum of understanding. Should the agencies choose to do that, but it's really left to agencies to determine what and how they're going to work with other agencies, and whether they want input from other agencies on their charge and how they're going to spend their funding.
Right. Thank you for that. I think in my head, I'm looking for, I need a visuals.
Like an org chart?
The org chart. I need the org chart.
Yep.
Because
Yeah,
at some
we
point
can
we may
definitely
want
do
to
that,
make
and I think
recommendations to combine things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one other thing that I want to mention, though, just in that is we can definitely do that for you, is the Office of Policy and Management plays like a counter role to OTG. So they're really responsible for the final development of the budget across all the agencies. And again, what gets funded is what's prioritized. So there's a back and forth there. And they also, like, whenever we make a policy recommendation, it goes through the Office of Policy and Management first for their review. If it's something that they're favorable of, then it goes to the Office of the Governor for final approval. So the sausage making is a little bit complicated on the executive branch side, and then you add in the legislative branch side, where then through the session, those policy priorities and statutes are then further negotiated. So what we go in with and what we come out with can look very different sometimes.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, Peter.
Kelly, well, first of all, Kara, wonderful question. I had the same questions, and in my mind, but they hadn't really formed into an actual question. So the swirl is much more organized, as you said it. And then Kelly Marie, boy, that's complicated. And for those of us who don't live in that world, and here I am, I'm hanging on by my fingernails to follow what you just said. And I'm thinking about our audience and the various entities and constituents, broadly speaking, not in the voting public sense, but the various entities we serve, who will be the potential beneficiaries of the commission. And there's something about it, all this work, that seems like what would be appealing would be to make this simple and straightforward. If you're as you are a business owner and a workforce developer, you don't want your eyes to roll back in your head thinking about all the bureaucracy. What you want to know is, we've got a government that makes sense, and they've got this, and they're going to make this easy for me.
Yep.
Right. And so as I'm thinking about the slide deck, which I think is in a much stronger place than the initial draft in the Word document, I think that it really frames up the problem well, and it's making a lot of progress toward where I think we want to be at the end of the month. But if I'm thinking about this slide deck, it's sort of like the complexity of, as you called it, the sausage making is an important baseline to establish of where we're starting from. Yeah. Right? And the crisscross of state agencies and interdependencies in this, mosaic, as we're calling it, without a defined point of authority to shape a system, is exactly I think, part of me wants to clarify the confusion, but part of me wants to just sort of like bathe in it and say that confusion is exactly why we're doing what we're doing.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. I think the process that we're going through right now. So the governor established an executive order establishing this work to happen, which means that it is a top priority from him. He does not just, set out willy-nilly executive orders. There's something very complex here that he understands. And through this work, raising it to the level that it has publicly as a priority of his, then provides kind of a level of an umbrella by which we can all be transparent and work towards a common goal. What we do want to do as well is bring as many legislators along for the ride as we can. And that's why you see like the legislators that have been chosen to sit on this commission for a particular purpose, because they lead a certain committee or the Senate or the legislatures and have a big voice. And the advocacy there, because we want them to then collaborate on what those policy decisions are going to be and funding decisions in the next legislative session. So the governor now will work on what his priorities are in his next session between now and the end of the year. And in the State of the State address, well, actually, as a couple weeks into January, the State of the State address is typically where he will express the priorities that he has for the session. And then the negotiations start with with the legislative branch through that session. We're on a biennium session, so this coming up is when we set the biennium budget. And so we're in the perfect timing to be able to say what funding needs to happen in order to make the systemic changes that we want to do and fund the programs that we want to fund in this budget, because the session we just closed is the off-year budget, and that's really just meant for adjustments. And if there's new funding through revenues that came in that was unexpected, how we want to allocate that. But there's not really huge shifts in policy and funding in the off year. So this timing is really perfect.
I'm thinking about our work product here in the proposed, as you're speaking, Kelly, I pulled up on my own computer slides, the slides, and I'm looking at the fragmented decision authority, siloed funding stream, CT today. And Kara, on the one hand, seeing it as a simplified visual so that we can understand it, I think it's important for us to understand it. But part of the storytelling and the building of the narrative and the inevitability of this work, I think, will be to point out just how confusing and crisscrossed it all is.
Yeah.
Right. And then you kind of almost want to envision a big red spray painted X right through it and say, like, what we're actually going to do is this one line, a system level authority. Of course, that's, I know it's an imaginary state, but just thinking about how to tell this story in a crisp way that's going to be appealing to people who have not only no knowledge, but really no interest in the sausage making.
Peter, I can't agree with you more. And that's why I asked for the org chart, because in my mind, I'm envisioning hundreds of boxes and lines going all over the place, trying to define those relationships. And my urgency, my brain wants to say, and I haven't even seen it yet, is how do we take all of those boxes and bucket them in a way to create a more streamlined process of decision-making and authority? Because I think there's a lot of noise in all of that. And I think, as you said, that's the issue. That's the heart of the problem.
And Chris, I think the slide gets at it. This is going to take 20 seconds. It's a little bit of diversion, but there's a Honda Prelude ad in the 1980s. Jackie Mason was, the comedian Jackie Mason. He's like, and there was a new kind of steering. It's 4-wheel steering. It's like, I'm trying to parallel park, and I turn the wheel this way. The front wheels go that way, and the back wheels go this way, and I don't know which way the car goes that way. And then the guy from Honda says, "Don't worry about it, Danny. Just get in the car and drive it. It'll be fine. Like we've got it figured out. Just get in the car." And you go from this like confused, like everything's connected and I don't get any of it, to just forget about it. We've got it all figured out for you. And that's sort of what, I can imagine an employer of 40 people with a manufacturing vent or whatever it is needs, they don't want to think through all this.
No, they don't.
You don't, right?
They don't. I know. Yes. I think if you see the org chart, it's more like boxes of silos, and then the state statutes are where like things overlap as to who does what in those boxes, and any crossover of boxes is mutual decisions to collaborate, not necessarily requirements to align. And our agency was put together to support the alignment of all of these efforts, but it hasn't quite gotten to the authority to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, Peter,
One final thought that I'll share is that I want to just re-emphasize the need to be relevant and useful to employers, right? And whatever framework we come up with, whatever we choose to be our demonstrable outcomes, that has to be sent through a fairly rich vetting process with with real live employers, with real live workforce needs. Because if it's theoretically and qualitatively appropriate and it fits everything, but then it doesn't actually come to life for our employers, then we won't have accomplished what we need to accomplish. And you know, we've, I just want to push the need for very rigorous, rich employer validation and structuring what we believe our outcomes to be based on not what we think employers might want, but on really truly vetted measurements and of employer feedback.
Absolutely.
So I just want to kind of recap everything that I think I just heard in terms of like major muscle movements, and particularly selfishly out of like things that we probably need to produce next. And one of the things I've heard is largely, I think we're all in pretty well alignment of the basic definition of the problem, that there is a mosaic that is incredibly complicated. I think the work still to be done to make this case a larger commission is to sort of do a baseline of here's the state government as we currently have it as it relates to this in like a more visual way. I think there's probably, and I don't want to necessarily commit to this yet, but just as a thought experiment, a sort of like network map we can make that shows how messy it can really be when you start adding in the blended overlap of the statutory requirements, funding lines, and whatnot. And you can kind of very intentionally create a visual that is incredibly messy because that's what people are living with day to day. And I think if you kind of show the silo and show the sort of network messy map, that kind of makes the point of what we kind of did in table format. But that doesn't really change the basic 3 buckets. It doesn't really change the basic like thesis we're working from. It seems like we have pretty good alignment there. It's about how we walk a group to get there and add a couple visuals to really do that. Does that sound about right to everyone?
It does. It does.
Okay.
Though hearing you say it again, Chris, the word mosaic seems generous to me. I think that it sounds, you know, I know it sounds funny, but like it really sounds more intentional than say, I don't know, it just sounds generous to me.
Fair. And we can certainly play with the verbiage. I think my goal, and we have just 2 more slides to get through in the last 5 minutes we have. But I think my goal, I think we have enough feedback to make a next version of this. And what I want to do is sort of agree that the basic thesis is basically there. I will work with Jen on figuring out how do we communicate that. And next meeting on Tuesday, we really want to figure like what should the components be for the future state be? Like what's the sort of, if you could wave your magic wand, what would a solution include? So Peter, all what you were just talking about of employer validation, certainly a part of that conversation. And then coming out of that meeting, I sort of want to have all the feedback I need to make the materials for June 25th, both the commission slides and the more in-depth like thing to send out to commissioners that walks anyone who wants to read it through the entire story, and want to be able to do that quickly enough to send it out to this entire group to sort of get asynchronous offline feedback to make sure we're getting all the details right. So with that, Kara.
Shall we move on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so very rich conversation. So leads us to the what does Connecticut need to decide? Some of these we were able to talk a little bit more about than others, but clearly the need to define and what is a career pathway in Connecticut, and you know how are all of those things aligned with the credentials, employer engagement, data accountability. I would probably add funding streams to that down the road, and what does it include and what does it exclude? You know, and what are the different entry points into that shared single common language? Who decides? So sounds like the Office of Workforce Strategy, as an example, has authority to coordinate, but not necessarily to decide and to direct. So how do we create, strengthen, and consolidate that system-wide? And then how does that information become operationalized throughout the system, the remaining parts of the system? What does the employer front door look like? Having, as a superintendent, 169 towns, 200 plus separate entry points. So how are we all working with the different employers and the different agencies so that we're all not duplicating the work. So one point, one engagement mechanism, and a voice of authority, and then which programs are worth scaling. So there are models that exist. There are programs that are really value added. So some are effective and they're funded, and some are funded and they don't work, and vice versa. So what is the governance mechanism for making the distinctions and acting on those, and how do we surface those programs? And the next slide. And then the path forward for this committee. We have two major meetings coming up. Each builds on that recommendation that's due on the 25th. So a definite landscape of the current state, and then what the good looks like. So going back to the mosaic, so outlining all that we talked about here today, and how that paints a picture of where we're at and the authority lines. Then an opportunity to review best practice. I think we're going to engage in that a little bit more between now and the 25th, and then the design principles. So what does it look like if we build it, and then what we need to decide in terms of the next steps. And then on June 16th, future state barriers. So that is I love that you, when the slide was updated about the bold vision, I think that is exactly, we can get really hankered down in all of the mechanics of this and lose the bigger picture of what we're going for. And I think it's really important to define what that is. And it certainly should be something that everybody gets excited and get behind. And then deepening understanding of best practice models. So where is it working? Identify all of the barriers to get there, some of those which we've already started to surface, and then gather feedback for the draft commission on the 25th, which will present our findings at that point and that stage. So a lot of work ahead in a very short time period.
Yeah, so I just want to thank everyone for the discussion today. I definitely got a lot of good feedback to be able to action, to be able to take all this material to the next level. We'll get you the material as soon as we can for the future state meeting to have a similar conversation on Tuesday. And then our intent is very much to run all the materials, get to a draft as quickly as possible, run it by everyone in the working group while ahead of June 25th, so we can do a couple rounds on that to make sure everyone's comfortable with it.
And could I just plug, this afternoon is the Governor's Workforce Council meeting. This is our statewide federally required state workforce board, but we do the entire state strategy there. So Miguel will be joining us a little bit before 3 today. And he's going to be spending about half an hour, 20 minutes, a half an hour talking about the commission, taking questions and answers. And then we're going to be breaking out into these working groups. Chris, I think you're leading this working group in the breakout session, where we'll be able to engage a much broader audience in kind of like a town hall, and get additional feedback from the public. We usually get a minimum of about 200 people. Up to 300 people joining these meetings. This time of year, it's a little hit or miss depending on, year-end things happening across the state. But if you have the opportunity to join us, I believe that you all received a link. We're also talking about Workforce Pell Care, which you may be interested in before this discussion.
Awesome. Well, I know
Thank
we're a
you
minute
so
over.
much.
Want to respect everyone's time, but hopefully we'll see folks on the Governor Workforce Council this afternoon, and stay tuned for emails. So thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Joining the meeting at 12:01. Thank you.
Thank you.